Welcome back to DemystifySci. I'm Shiloh.
I'm Anastasia.
This is the podcast where we search for theories and ideas that are going to change the world. And today we are talking about the origin of the Zodiac.
The Zodiac is a series of constellations that the sun tracks over the course of a year and is widely considered to be the marker of the early emergence of human ability. So the Babylonians made their star maps, and they're thought to be the first ones that noticed that this pattern even existed in the stars, and all of the things that followed, their geometry, their mathematics, their complex society, their ability to conquer their region, seems in some way to be founded on this ability to pay attention to the cycles of the heavens. And our guest today, Hugh Evans, discovered something that completely rewrites this story. He believes that he found ancient star maps of the Zodiac on the ground in Wales, in this place called Gwynedd. And he believes that these represent the very first iterations of the constellations on Earth. And this raises a lot of questions, because how is it that these ancient Britons in this isolated part of Wales managed to produce this set of constellations if it's the Babylonians in the Middle East who are the ones that are believed to have made the first star maps? And our conversation today opens up the discussion of who are these people? What is the evidence for their star maps? And how is it possible that a group of people who are widely considered to have been relatively primitive, living in wooden shacks without really a lot of technological capacity, how is it possible that they made a 2,000 square mile map of the constellations on the ground that has stood to this day from the Neolithic age?
This conversation with Hugh opens up a much larger investigation that we're going to be undertaking on the show in the coming months, where we look at the rise and fall of Bronze Age civilizations and try to stitch together the role of the ancient Brittonic and European peoples that are not part of the classical story, because it seems evident that there was wide-ranging trade, that a lot of the components necessary for the rise of Bronze Age technology were coming from mines in Britain and on the Atlantic coast of Europe. And the question of how that trade was facilitated, the direction of the diffusion of knowledge, whether about the stars or about other technologies, is really interesting and seems to be somewhat cloudy in the standard picture. So we're going to try to make sense of that. If you guys know anybody who is studying this kind of thing that you would like us to talk to, we would love to hear your ideas in the comments section.
We would also love it if you could help us keep this podcast going. So one of the things that you can do is you can pick up some of our merch. We live and die by the support of our listeners, and that means that you can pick up a copy of our very first record with our band, Secretary of Nature. It's a bunch of forest grunge explorations of the meaning of life. It's called Everything Is So Good Here. And that's available on vinyl because that's a really nice physical medium in which to listen to music. There's also our book. We are in the stage of proofing it. We are on round 2 of proofs, trying to make sure that it comes out absolutely perfect. The time to purchase it on presale is running out, because once it is on Amazon, it's going to have a totally different pricing set. And so consider picking up a copy of Paradox Lost, The Material Principles of Natural Philosophy, before it goes live to the general public. And we got some t-shirts in the YouTube shelf down below if you're into, clothes.
If you have your own theory about something, do consider signing up for Paradigm Drift. We are taping the next episode on June 12th, which is closely approaching, and I would love to see you there. So check it out. There's a link to all of the details in the description. Otherwise, enjoy the conversation with Hugh. Check out some of our music as we lead in the conversation, and we'll see you next time.
In the modern world, the people who control time control everything.
Whoa.
Okay. Now we take the availability, the free availability of time for granted these days. You and I, people, the viewers, we have arranged to be here at 6 p.m. UK time. I'm not referring to anyone else for that, and I'm not paying them for it. But imagine if I had to, where would my life be? So in ancient times, those people that controlled time, they controlled everything. Arguably, it was the key components that made the Royal Navy the most powerfulest fleet on the oceans and the start of the British Empire.
Well, that makes a lot of sense though with maritime travel, right? Because you have to travel east to west and be able to pinpoint how far you've gone east to west, and that's impossible without a clock, essentially, especially if the skies are
Yes,
overcast and
absolutely. Absolutely. They used to use a sextant and you needed charts. And if it was overcast, that was a problem. And, you know, taking that bearing is only so accurate. But if you had a pocket watch that could measure time very accurately, you had a real advantage. Imagine, you know, being on the land and being able to move groups of people so that they were all at the same place at the same time. What advantage you would have. But that's only one of the reasons for wanting to control time. You know, at societal levels, at all societal levels, you know, it aids understanding of self, of the community, of what you're trying to do, you know, and just personal development, societal development. It pervades all aspects of what you do. So I think um, it the star maps of Gwynedd were set up in North Wales like a big clock that covers over 1 million acres.
yeah, I want to hear about that. That's obviously at the core of the book that I read, which is Zodiac. And I love how
Yeah.
you detail your experience in parallel as you discover this. It has all these field notes for each
Yeah.
section as you go through it. You know, before we move on to that though, because I want to hear about what brought you into this and what you were able to learn about these people before, like what was the extent understanding of these zodiac symbols before you got to it. So I want to get there in a second, but I had one other thought about the reason that time might be important is that it allows you, if you have a good, reliable calendar and you have some way of knowing exactly what day of the year it is, not just sort of how, you know, roughly if it's summer or winter, but precise, you can actually have uh, regular ceremonial experiences. So you can bring the
Well,
community
absolutely.
together. So I'm sort of piggybacking off what you're saying, but you could actually have, you know, a fall celebration where people come
Yeah.
from all these surrounding communities. You could have a mid fall celebration. You can actually start to really precisely tell people when to meet at X, Y, and Z location, which gives you the ability to nucleate a real powerful force of a community. I feel like is
Yeah,
that kind of what you're
absolutely
getting
right.
at? Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you know, at every level within society, it increases sort of interactional meaning. And you can keep looking at it, or you can look at it in from the other direction. What happens if you don't know much about time? Those people that lived on the equator, where all the day lengths are the same length, how do they measure time? I mean, they will have different ceremonies that are important to them. And you know, the ancient Egyptians only had 3 seasons because which was Nile flood, sowing, and harvest. They didn't really understand winter,
That makes
and
sense.
so the sort of like the people of the north, they had to understand these changing periods of weather because they might have needed to migrate, they might have needed to go from high to low pasture, and they were obviously affected by things like snow and frost and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that the community organizing feature is really compelling here because I
Mm.
think that probably in prehistoric times, people were able to migrate with the seasons, if for no other reason than they watched the animals do it. You see the
Yeah,
geese flying this way, or there's lots of cues that the season's getting on. But if you want to precisely say, hey, the third week of May, we're all going to get together from all over
absolutely.
England at one place, and all of the important people are going to be there and set up all the trade agreements for the rest of the year, or whatever the heck they're doing, I have no idea. That seems like it requires a precision that saying, oh, well, when the deer start to, fawn or whatever, like that's not good enough. That's not precise
I agree.
enough.
I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. And my personal experience is in my business life, I am a grower. I do grow plants. And this year, we've had a less sunlight in the spring months. So my crops are further behind. I'm not, I'm not looking at the moon or the day length to decide when to harvest my crops. I'm intimately involved with my crops. But at a societal level, you'd want to, be at a certain place at a certain time, maybe for the equinox, which was the start of the ancient year. It's the most accurate day to measure because the day length is a sine wave, and you've got the steepest gradient at the equinox. And at the solstices, the day length doesn't vary much, and it's very hard to determine the actual moment of the solstice. So the equinox was the start of the year, the ancient year, which is why the first sign of the zodiac is Aries, starting 21st of March.
Yeah, I'm pretty sold on the idea that time is a really, really important organizing principle. Like some of my earliest memories from being a kid, are like watching the clock on the wall in the school, like just waiting for the bell to ring so I can go play with my friends again.
I'm old enough that in Britain we didn't have children's entertainment on television from about 6 o'clock in the evening. And in the winter, when you're coming back from either the shops or maybe you've been out to see relatives, the stars are there. And we could still see the Milky Way in those days. And I would speak to my parents and grandparents, and they would tell me stories. And, so that's how a lot of ancient people, I think, started getting involved with the storytelling of the stars.
Yeah, it's really hard to remember something without a story. That certainly must play into things. If it's very hard to just name a star without, first of all, putting it in a constellation so you have some context spatially for how to find it. But then if you want to remember that context, it would make a lot of sense to maybe not even weave a new story, but tell a story that everybody already knows, right? So if
Well,
you have
well,
some mythological tradition, you have some religion, you have some folk tales, you have, I don't know, just a normal experience everybody goes through, like childbirth or war or whatever people were experiencing back then. It would make a lot of sense to give some form to that memory as a story,
absolutely,
essentially.
absolutely, and that's really the conclusion of the origin of time. The origin of the zodiac is mainly about discovery, and as you said, they're the landscape adventures, and you can go there today. Lots of people have and navigated around the landscape with my book. But the origin of time completes the panoply, the celestial mythology. All the ancient constellations are on three rings, which I call the three great wings of time. They are the ecliptic, which measures time in every moving moment; the Milky Way, which is the journey of the soul; and a ring called um, the ring of evolution. Um, and they are the
That's a new
stories
one to
that
me.
you. Well, I made it up. I made up that
Okay.
name.
Okay.
So, um, but those represent the stories you were talking about a minute ago, Shiloh.
I see. All right.
And
Well, we can
I,
unpack. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, sure. I mean, we can. I'll look forward to doing that. So I don't want to jump ahead too far.
You're you're weaving a story that brings us to the very edge of the question, which is, when did humans come to wake up and start to realize that there are these celestial processes that happen in a cyclic way that would allow them to be able to maintain a society that was more organized and more dispersed than ever before. Because as we've been talking about time, and both of you have been introducing the ideas of coordination, we're talking about coordination across vast distances. Because if you live a valley over, you can just send a guy to go run and tell them, hey, next week let's meet up and we can exchange our wares.
Sure.
In terms of ancient cultures, it seems like timekeeping and celestial planning is necessary because there were these long range interactions between
There were.
tribes and communities. And I want to understand a little bit about the time period that you have been studying and what the common wisdom was about the time period and the nature of the constellations when you got into this work for the first time.
Okay, so when I started with my research, I was really in a landscape discovery mode. And in the companion, The Origin of Time, I'm answering the question of who, when, and the other one, can't remember now. But the who and the when are perhaps what you're referring to. And as I investigated this subject, it became apparent to me that the people who had named the stars and the constellations to reflect their behavior must have been watching them a very long time. So Arcturus, which is the bright star in the constellation Bootes, is Arctur, superior turning. Now, if you watch Arcturus for 100,000 years, it moves a quarter of the way around the heavens. And the only way that it will do that is if the only way that you can make sense of that is observers on Earth will have to work out that we are going around it, because this is a repeating cycle.
Were you already interested in constellations and archaeoastronomy before you began, or was
Yes,
this
I mean,
just
absolutely.
a random?
No. I've been researching the stars all my life. I mean, I started off at university reading astrophysics for a year, and I didn't really enjoy the gravitational model even at that point. Those years ago, they weren't answering any of my questions, so I just changed, and I graduated with a master's degree in aeronautical engineering. But I continued my research, and I'd also been researching all the Gnostic Gospels and all the ancient mythology around the stars. And I came across I was listening to a presentation by Hugh Newman, who was presenting that Idris was one of the three great astronomers who charted the heavens from atop the mountain Cadair Idris, which is named after Idris. And Idris in the ancient British tradition and the Islamic tradition is Enoch. So I had been working on star maps in Wales with some other researchers, and I started looking at Cadair Idris, the mountain, and that is actually where my father's family is from. My cousin Caledrin delivered post on Cadair Idris on his push bike. That's what he was given. Up and down. And so I had a personal interest, but I immediately started seeing some of the features in the landscape, and a couple of other people had suggested that there were star maps on the ground in Gwynedd, which is the name of the region. Mike Harris in his book Owen, a number of other people, they'd got the plough correctly located at the centre on top of Cadair Idris, and one or two other constellations, but it really had sort of petered out. My great breakthrough was realizing that the rivers of Gwynedd are the ecliptic. And ancient people believed that the rivers, the springs, the ocean, they were the interface between the mortal world and the underworld. The underworld was not a place that we think of it now in modern terms as hell. The underworld was just somewhere, it's quite benevolent, and it fed the mortal world. And the ecliptic is the boundary between the mortal world and the underworld. And these were the rivers.
By the way,
And
I don't think we've told people what the ecliptic are if they're not astronomy types, but the ecliptic is the plane where all of the planets are orbiting the sun. So you basically think about the line that all of the planets follow in the night sky. This is the ecliptic.
yeah, and the sun and the moon, that's their apparent path as viewed from Earth. So all of the land features are written in Welsh. If you can't speak Welsh, you're not going to see them. If you drive down Main Street, you'll see the drugstore with the big sign above it, and the jailhouse and the post office. It's not hard to see, but if it's in a different language, you might not know. So the whole of the landscape is written to reflect the constellations. It's not just a case of looking to see shapes in the landscape, like looking to see faces in clouds.
Can you give us an example of that?
I'll have to read from my book because there are so many. So Draco on the landscape at the head of the snake or the serpent are two standing stones. Yeah, that's it. Pont Skepin, bridge of nostrils. There's a range of standing stones and stone circles that delineate the constellation along several ridges, and at the head there is some standing stones where the nostrils are. So there are lots of little things like that, and you have to really piece them together.
Wait, I want to make sure that this is really clear. So there are names in Welsh given that describe nostrils, is what you're saying, and this maps onto the concept of dragon, which is what the constellation represents. And then there's a spatial mapping as well with these named features on the ground with respect
so these standing stones are in the right place in the constellation around the mountain that is the head.
Do the standing stones have what other names? So you mentioned the nostrils. Are there other words or features on the landscape?
Standing stones are called Pont Skepin, which means bridge of nostrils.
I see.
And so by the time, so you come to Wales and you start the search from Cadair Idris because you hear this presentation that Idris is mythologically significant because it parallels this other mythology that's, I guess, like Mesopotamian-ish. And Enoch is the father of Noah?
Ray's grandfather.
Great-grandfather. Okay. My biblical scholarship is not on point, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, we have to say that would be salt, but, some generations older than Noah.
Okay. And so why is he significant for constellations?
Because in the ancient British tradition, Idris charted the heavens.
I see. And so
from the top Cadair Idris. And in the book of Enoch, sorry to jump in, it's written in the first person, and it says, I went to be with Uriel to receive instruction on the heavens.
And connect Uriel for this to us. To this for
Uriel is an archangel. and it is probably the more important of the two, because 3L means the chief spirit. L means spirit or intelligence. Angel, Michael, Raphael.
So it sounds like what
L.
you're saying is that it seems like you could interpret this as somebody went to this place in Wales in ancient times to learn some important piece of knowledge about the stars. That's how you interpret it.
Right.
And
Yes,
you're like,
that's
there's
very
a
on.
network of information. There's this spread of scholarship in ancient, prehistoric ancient times that spans from the Near East, at least to the Near East, all the way to Wales, is the way you're interpreting
Yes,
this.
absolutely. I don't know where it's originated, and it's probably at least it's probably older than that. You know, my book, The Origin of Numbers, I analyze the origin of all the measurement names. So the foot, for example, and these measurement modules are evident in ancient structures on every continent of the world except Antarctica that we know of. So I don't know where they originated. I'm characterizing them, my best guess, to be a pre-Younger Dryas civilization.
I see. All right. So great. Let's come back to that in a second, because there's one piece of this puzzle that hasn't been made entirely clear.
Okay, maybe you're going to ask the question I was going to ask. Go ahead.
Well, I don't think that we sufficiently answered the question of what mainstream astronomers, archaeologists, anthropologists make of the zodiac right now, or when you arrived at the discipline.
Well, I don't think there is a very good um, deep explanation of the origin of the zodiac. It's a little bit confused, and it's in component form. So Claudius Ptolemy, he redefined the zodiac and the constellations circa 50 AD, which is current era, for the Roman Empire. And he was a Copt from Upper Egypt. So he may well have had a lot of understanding about the heavens and the constellations, but he did it in such a short period of time. It is very unlikely that he did the surveying of the heavens himself. And in fact, he tells us that he referred to all the great astronomers of antiquity at that time. And he defines the modern constellations that we know today of the zodiac. And he also puts Earth at the center of the rotating universe. But this was probably for expediency and for his Roman overlords, who just wanted to raise taxes over the empire so that people knew that Mars was in Taurus across the whole empire at the same time. Because at that time, they weren't using the same constellations of the zodiac across the whole empire. So
Okay,
if we
so
go back,
I see. So so Ptolemy standardizes it, but he's obviously integrating some sea of knowledge that he's inherited, and it's not
yeah,
entirely clear.
absolutely.
Okay, so that actually is interesting, because it makes the modern assessment of the situation not really at odds with what you're presenting. It's just that they have no access to the prehistoric, let's call Ptolemy the beginning of the historic record with respect to the constellations. I mean, there's probably pieces that you can pick up, but seems like mainstream scholarship doesn't really think about it much before Ptolemy. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, you can go a little further back. There's the Dendera zodiac, which has most of the constellations of the zodiac, but is rather confused about the northern circumpolar constellations. That's circa 50 BCE at Dendera in Upper Egypt, and that is in the Ptolemaic Greco-Ptolemaic era of Egyptian dynastic history. I haven't been able to find an Egyptian star chart showing all the constellations earlier than that through any of the dynasties in the New Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, or Old Kingdom.
What about this? When you take an intro astronomy course, usually somebody's going to point to the Babylonians maybe as having made the first star charts. How does that fit into this story?
The Babylonians wrote down their star charts, and the most famous summary is the Mul-Apin, which is dated to roughly 900 of the current era. And there is, I think, about 1000 BCE, and there is an astrolabe that's also has survived, and that's dated to 950 BCE. So when we think about the history of Mesopotamia, it's had successive empires and regimes take over. So we had the Sumerians, which were a confederation of small kingdoms. They were overtaken by Sargon of Akkad to create the unified Akkadian Empire circa 350 BCE. That's the first time it was written down. And you get the library at Nineveh from that period. And he wrote it down because he wanted credibility for ruling the empire as it was, which only lasted 300 years.
Is there any mention of constellations at that point in those really ancient records?
There's a sort of like a garbled mention of stars. There's collections of stars, but not really constellations that we know in the modern sense today. So we have the path of Enlil, the path of Anu, which is the more superior creator god, which is more the circumpolar stars, and the path of Enki. They weren't really constellations. They may well have been noticing these stars and monitoring the movement of the planets against these stars to create a similar effect, but they did not make the constellations we know today. Then you go into the Babylonian period and the Assyrian period, and the Neo-Babylonians, the Chaldeans, and then you've got around about 1000 BCE the Mul-Apin, which may have referred. It does refer to constellations. It may be referring to previous periods, but we don't have it written down from those previous periods.
Interesting. And then going back to the biblical stuff, I would assume have been compiled around the same time as the Neo-Babylonian period, like the Enoch stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We know that the Old Testament is probably after Abraham. We know roughly where Abraham is in the grand scheme of things. When the Jerusalem was sacked and they were all taken to Babylon, they lost a lot of their records. And Cyrus the Great, when he came from Persia and sacked Babylon, he sent them back to Jerusalem and that part of the world and said, first, copy all these sacred books. And that a lot of that became the Old Testament.
Yeah, so it almost seems like the Babylonians and the Hebrews were drawing on different knowledge bases in that case. If you have this group referring to some ancient tradition of perhaps studying, that's the hypothesis anyways, they were studying in this Welsh observatory, and there was this, kind of nebulous tradition of this wisdom about the stars coming from this other part of the world, but that somehow didn't show up in the Babylonian picture.
Well, maybe they took bits and used it as they wanted within their culture, like a lot of religions do. The example I would use is the saint's halo. The Christians used the saint's halo because they adopted this previous solar cult. They repurposed it. So maybe there was some of that. And I do get into the evolution of some of those constellations. I think that the use of the scorpion did come from Mesopotamia because there aren't any scorpions in Wales. But then again, I don't know exactly where these people came from. I'm not saying it originated in Wales. It is just preserved in Wales because of a number of different reasons. It was set up as a star map, as an observatory, because you get a higher degree of finesse when measuring the day length. It is extremely remote. It is not prone to being attacked or overrun. It is very mild. It doesn't have earthquakes if you're setting up stones to measure the heavens over vast periods of time. So it became practically a good solution. The southern circumpolar constellations are mapped on the ground in North Wales, and they're only partially visible on the opposite end of the precessionary cycle. Yet they are placed in the right place. On top of the largest mountains. So Centaurus and Crux are on top of Snowdon, the largest mountain, the most important mountain. It is called Wispa, which means the spirit place.
I want to
And
make
that
sure
is
people
the-
follow what you're saying. So you're saying that they encoded knowledge that they couldn't directly observe where they were at.
Absolutely right. So they
So
must have sailed the oceans. I've just come back from Easter Island last November, and there's not a lot of land south of 35 degrees south. So I don't think the heavens were charted from the southern hemisphere, but whoever charted them in the northern hemisphere, and certainly the ancient constellations are rather sparse in the southern hemisphere. They're all modern in the southern hemisphere, but whoever charted the southern hemisphere would have gone there to see the stars.
So I took a look at what was listed in the Mul Apen. So this is the Babylonian star chart. And it seems like it does have 18 different constellations that have been more or less mapped onto the Greek zodiac. And so it's got, Aries, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, all of these traditional constellations were already listed by the Babylonians. And the dates for it, the dates that you've given are totally accurate in the sense that there's a spread. There's some people that are saying that it's 2500 BC. A lot of people, the consensus date is kind of settled around 1000 BC, but this is still, it's really early. I think that we have this sense of this time period as being still just nascent human development in terms of complex cultures, but these are clearly people that have spent a long time watching these constellations. They have mapped them, they have put them down into records, they have named them, they have a complex mythology about them.
Yeah. Just coming back to Pisces, the Babylonians had that really as two separate constellations, the fishes and the swallow.
Mm-hmm.
So there's these sort of slight anomalies. It's not a complete zodiac. And you can go back further in time. Pillar 43 of Göbekli Tepe has quite a lot of constellations on it.
Mm.
And so there's a gap between 9600 BCE and whether it's, the cusp of the first and second millenniums BCE. I don't know what happened in between. There are other constellations, perhaps the oldest constellations before the full zodiac had been determined is Taurus, because we see in the Lascaux caves of southwest France and similar caves in northern Spain, the depiction of Taurus, and an accurate depiction of a bull with the right stars in the right place. So I think, and they're carbon dated to at the edge of carbon dating, circa 20,000 BCE. So I think people had been developing constellations and an understanding of how they wanted to represent the movement of the celestial bodies against the night sky. I'm claiming that the star maps of Gwynedd is the origin of the modern zodiac we know today. It's the oldest version of the modern zodiac we know today. Not that there are alternatives elsewhere. There might well be. If there's an older one, that's great. And perhaps my overarching hypothesis ultimately will be that this ancient civilization used their language to determine the heavens and other things like measurement and explain the natural world around them. And, I don't know where they originated. There was a reduction of humans around about 70,000 BCE caused by we don't know what, roughly about the same time as the Mount Toba super volcano, where universities suggest that the number of humans reduced to 10,000 adults because of the reduction in the gene pool. So that would give an opportunity for one culture to emerge with one understanding of what language, and then to develop it, and it to then spread onto other continents.
There's something really interesting about the Welsh language too. Maybe it's worth discussing a little bit because
Well,
from my basic knowledge, there's some really interesting overlaps with ancient etymology from the Near East as well. Am I on the right track with that?
yeah, absolutely. And in my book, I do translate some Sumerian cuneiform using Welsh, and Sumerian is supposed to be a language isolate, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. And the further you go back in time, the better it works. It's not a complete solution, but there are enough interpretations to really ask a question again about the origin of languages. The person who determined the modern view of language origin was a man called Sir William Jones, and he was a Welsh circuit judge
Hmm.
traveling around Wales hearing cases. So he's a fluent Welsh speaker in the mid 1700s. And he ended up going to India and starting a sort of a language school. I can't remember what it's called, but you might look it up. And he determined that the sort of Celtic languages were split into Brittonic and Gaelic, and they all had a common origin with Latin and Greek and some of the Far Eastern languages that he was becoming aware of.
Yeah, I've heard about the Hebrew overlaps more than anything, but yeah, the other ones are new to me. It does seem like a really, really intriguing language set, though, that has
Yeah, absolutely. So the
that's
best Hebrew one I know is Mary, and Mary is from fair or mare, and that means bright and fair, and is applicable to a star. On the star maps of Gwynedd, all the St. Mary's churches that are ancient are located in constellations of the 20 brightest stars of the celestial heavens. And there are no others.
this is all really interesting. So it seems like we're starting to get a picture of this particular location in Wales as perhaps not being the origin point, but perhaps just being the last remaining place where this ancient tradition is visible. Maybe it was the first, maybe it wasn't. It's hard to say, but it seems like a stable, isolated, remote place that's been able to preserve this tradition, and the language itself seems to encode some distant memory of I'm not going to use the word global, but some sort of far-reaching culture, at least
Yeah,
linguistically,
that's fair.
which almost certainly was reflected in the society as well. So we have this sense that the ancients were far better connected than we can read from any text in particular.
Absolutely. They had a verbal tradition, and the verbal tradition is stronger than a written tradition. Welsh is a modular language. It's made up of root words, prefixes, and suffixes, and so is English to a certain extent. But English is a written language, so it's very keen to borrow loan words, and it tried to simplify Welsh, which was also a sort of a passport language. If you knew how to speak Welsh, well, you didn't. So then people knew who you were. And Welsh is an extremely modular language. It doesn't accept loan words very well at all. There are only really modern ones. There are no ancient ones. So you can deconstruct all those meanings. And you can actually see the evolution of language in the components of the Welsh language. You can see the evolution of that language. So, for example, a bird is an edin. Ed is also the adverb for velocity, and in means a thing. So an edin is a thing that moves fast. So you can look at all of these. A cat is from cat, which is to hold, to keep, and the us suffix again means a thing that holds and keeps. That's what a cat is. And this word cat is used through many words. So a circle is a K. Again, is something that holds and contains. A care, but an R on the end, that's like a fort or an enclosure. And it's also used to define the ecliptic, which is an enclosure.
And then
So it's all
cairn comes from care.
yes, a circle of stones.
I see. Okay, so basically we have this proposed star map on the ground in Wales, and as you tell the story, the thing that first pops into my mind is, how do you take the stars and accurately and definitively map them onto something that is on the ground? Because we're talking about a map that would have been made, let's say conservatively 1000 BC, because we have the constellations in Mesopotamia. We have that there's these linguistic connections between Wales and the Middle East. So conservatively 1000 BC. Much less conservatively, I think that you can say, 2500, maybe earlier. Language changes a lot over that kind of period of time. And so if you're going to Wales and you're looking at the landscape and you have Cadair Idris, how do you know that these aren't modern names that were given much later? How do you start to piece together the fact that these are actually genuinely older names and not something that somebody did in the modern age?
Well, I would challenge that assumption in the first instance.
Okay. Which one?
We're told those things, that language changes over time,
Mm.
but verbal languages don't. When you look at cultures that have been isolated, they have maintained their verbal languages.
Hmm.
And the British creation myths, which are written in Welsh, called the Mabinogi, they were passed down by the verbal tradition. They're still that when they were written down in the 12th century, they were still accurate, and they remember the rise of the sea levels circa 5000 BCE, because it's part of the story.
I think that the maintenance of the ideas is absolutely fair, and it's hard to tell if a spoken language changes over time because you can't go back and you can't see the way that it was spoken 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, right?
No, that's true. Welsh has changed in the modern world, but it was relatively unchanged right up until the Second World War. It
Mm.
hadn't gone through the evolution that English went through in the first and second millennia of the current era. It's extremely resilient because it's modular. You can't reverse meanings into words and invent words. They were still quite an isolated culture because they spoke Welsh, but also they were geographically quite isolated in Britain. and they were resistant to changing their language. So I would challenge that the assumption is that the language has changed over a long period of time. The Mabinogi demonstrates it hasn't, and we still have a lot of manuscripts going back hundreds of years showing that there's been much less migration of the Welsh language compared to English over the same period.
There is something really interesting about how these ancient Brittonic languages still only persist on the fringes of the British islands, right? I mean, out in Wales, Ireland, northern Scotland, you
Yeah.
actually
So,
see some remnant that seems somehow untouched in the same way that the mainland has been. Obviously, for people who aren't aware, the English is basically a Germanic language that made itself dominant quite late in the story that we've been telling here. I think what was it, like around the end of the first millennium in the Common Era, right?
well, I mean, I would challenge that a bit because we are labouring under some rewriting of the facts. I'm trying to be careful with what I say because I don't want really to get into the political, side of things. But I'll give you an example. Um, School in Welsh is ysgol, Ysgol, and this is the origin of school in English, Schule in Dutch and German, and école ultimately in French. And we know it's the origin because it's from two smaller words, goal. Us means what exists, and as a prefix, it's sort of like to facilitate. And golai is light, enlightenment, to facilitate enlightenment.
That's cool.
Same with hospital, ysbyty in Welsh, to facilitate the preserving of life.
Do you think
It's
they
not
could
like,
just be common roots from a pre-Brittonic era? I mean, the Germans and the Britons
yes,
both drawing
yes,
from some common
and
culture.
that would be Welsh. You could work so many examples. There is no intrinsic modular explanation in German or Latin on a lot of words. They spontaneously exist, whereas there is multiple. All words in Welsh are intrinsically modular. So celestial, we're told, is from Latin. Sur clestra, with no meaning, it just means the sky. Sur clestra in Welsh means star matrix. And clestra is made of two smaller words, ple, which is a place, and ystra, a course.
Interestingly, Arabic appears to also be a similarly modular language.
I've heard that, and yes, I don't know a lot about Arabic.
What is
So
the, sorry, I feel stupid right now. Modular. So uh, I always thought, like, the way that I learned how to increase my vocabulary when I was a kid studying language was by looking at Greek and Latin roots and learning these and how they applied. Is that not modular as well?
No, so this is the idea that you have, like the way that Hugh is describing the word for school and the word for hospital, you have two different things that mean independent concepts that are then plugged together in order to make the composite word. And so I think that Greek and Latin roots do have a little bit of that, but endings don't often have a specific meaning. Like I think that Hugh's point is that if you look at something like school, it's not a modular word that comes from some concatenation of two separate concepts. It is just the unit itself that
Sure.
represents this larger concept. And Hugh's like, but if you look at Welsh, in Welsh there actually is an etymology from these smaller components that comes
yeah,
together and forms the word that not only German and French, but also Russian, szkola. And same for
right.
hospital, госпиталь. And so these things do, I think those are great examples where who knows what direction it goes into. And the fact that there's a link between Arabic and Welsh is even more interesting, because then you have these two super ancient languages, clearly sites of deep cultural development that perhaps were like two poles of a similar world, and the languages developed in different directions. And so it's a very beautiful story. But when the original question that I was asking was less about the specific evolution of the language, because language may change, it may not. I think your argument about there being a inherent consistency in how the words are arranged that prevents them from being able to be easily modulated is fair. But for constructing your star maps, to go back to the example of Draco. So you have this feature on the landscape. You have this crest of ridges, and the ridges have stones on them, and the stones have names.
And the mountains and the peaks in that area also reflect Draco.
And so how do you know that those specific names are ancient? That's the question.
Well, the all the stone circles and the standing stones are dated by Welsh Heritage Organisation at sort of Bronze Age, and the field boundaries, which are stone walls, have really been established for a long time and have remained where they are. There are even older than Bronze Age, they're Neolithic farm enclosures on those mountains as well, and they've had to been made of stone walls. So I don't know how it can be proven that they're any older. They may well have received their names as a result of the star map. They may have been created at the same time. I am dating the star maps of Gwynedd at around the time of Enoch, and because he was great grandfather of Noah, I am putting my flag in at a roughly 5000 BCE. And I mean, there's going to be some movement in that figure, but I'm not so worried about that. I'm concerned about establishing the origin of the zodiac.
You think that the place names given, so we can stick with 5,000 years. That's fine. You think that the place names that were given for 5,000 years have survived for 7,000 years? Like, it's such a conservative cultural landscape.
Perhaps, yes.
That's really interesting. I mean, I guess there are some cities that have maintained their names for a very long time. Jericho, right?
Sidon, Tyre, Rome.
London.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I mean,
Day, City of the Moon.
Okay. So then let's get into the story of how you started to piece this together. You started Kata Idris.
Landscape zodiacs and star maps is not an uncommon thing in Britain. There's at least 60 known landscape zodiacs today, and some of them are quite modern, which fields just and some are quite old. And I'm just saying that this is the origin of the zodiac, and this used to be the High King of Britain, and Queen, the area of the High King of Britain, Gwynedd.
The High King of Britain?
So in the first millennium and second millennium BCE, Britain was a series of kingdoms. And there was one high king, which is like the one who had the highest rank, and that was in Gwynedd.
Interesting. And so you figure that because the seat of power of this ancient Welsh world was in Gwynedd, that this would have been the place where the largest star map was constructed.
That happened afterwards. I really found the star map first, and it is the most complete. The other star maps that are on the ground in Britain, just saying there's over 60 landscape zodiacs in Britain that are known. they're incomplete, and there are many inaccuracies, new constellations added, and things like that. So the star maps of Gwynedd is the only accurate and complete star map in Britain and the world that I know of.
Take us on that journey. Take us back to when you got into this and how this all unfolded for you.
And the first one that you found?
Well, the first one I found was Ursa Major, which is on top of Cadair Idris, but I was really only reworking what someone else had already done. And they'd already suggested Ursa Minor and Bootes, which were in the correct positions. But they'd suggested a couple of other constellations, and they ended up being incorrect. So I believed I found Leo, which is very close to Bootes and Ursa Major in the heavens above. And then I realized the rivers were the ecliptic. And I just worked then round the ecliptic from Leo, and you can see the the mountains, the names of the mountains that reflect the different constellations.
The Ursa one's really fascinating to me because that is a constellation. Ursa means bear, by the way. I think that's Latin. But that's one that you actually find even in Native American traditions being represented as a bear, especially in this arc along the Great Lakes area, essentially, reaching out to the Pacific Northwest. That's pretty wild. I mean, I guess it could be a coincidence, but that's a really interesting starting point just because of how culturally wide-reaching I mean, it doesn't look like a bear, let's be honest. I mean,
No, it doesn't look like a bear at all, because it's got a tail that's like as long as the body, and bears don't have tails. In Welsh, a bear is an arth, and R, AR, is an important word because it means upon. And depending on the context, when you apply it to the heavens, it means the stars. A plough is an arad. And in that context, it's upon the earth. So to plough is a radio, the verb. And this is also the origin of Bear, Bear. So there's R and Ursa. Yeah, and it is interesting that other people have linked the constellation to a bear, because actually you're right, it doesn't look like a bear. So is this a remembering of a presentation of the heavens going back at some common point?
well, I'm really
Maybe.
intrigued by the location of those Native American tribes that use that myth because they're clustered around a region that also has a genetic link to the Near East as well. So this is pretty established science that there's this haplogroup, there's a genetic marker. I think it's called X2. It doesn't matter. Let's call it haplogroup X. Yeah, people can go find it on the internet.
Yeah.
And there's an astonishing correspondence between this group around the Great Lakes area and indigenous communities and the Near East, going out towards Mesopotamia, essentially, but especially in modern Lebanon, Israel, places like that. And the standard explanation is that that gene type traveled with people across Asia to the east, across North America with the Bering Land Bridge, and somehow didn't leave any traces of itself during that transit, even though it's clustered all the way along the Atlantic seaboard, reaching up and down Nova Scotia and then across to the Great Lakes area. It's a remarkable thing. And then that you have this Ursa Major correspondence, the bear being representing the same constellation with a very similar mythological entity attached to it. It's too much for me personally.
It is. And you have in addition, Australian people who took the myth of the Seven Sisters to Australia and then were isolated for at least 50,000 years. So the Seven Sisters being the Pleiades is
Mm.
a myth shared by many cultures, the Japanese, many European cultures.
And that one's really interesting too, because if you go and look at it right now, you can only see 6 of them. And
Yeah,
but in the past, they would have been in slightly different positions. And it
that's
seems
right.
like if you take one of these astronomy softwares and run it back in time several tens of thousands of years, they actually do separate out into 7 of them. And yeah, the 7 sisters, 7 sages. I mean, there's a lot of different representations of the Pleiades in some form or another of being 7, which is very interesting and strange.
There's a Japanese myth where a fisherman goes to the ocean, side of the ocean, and sort of falls in love with one of the 7 sisters and tries to woo her. And then ultimately he does, and they fall in love, and 7 becomes 6 because she becomes mortal.
Mm.
And if you look at the Pleiades long enough, you can hold your thumb out at the end of your arm. It works for men and women because of the size of the thumb to the arm. It roughly covers the Pleiades, which is just over 1 degree of the heavens, 1.3 degrees. And the Pleiades moves 1 width of your thumbnail every 100,000 years. And it turns around the center star, Alcyon. And as it turns around that center star, you get this phenomenon of 7 stars becoming 6, and then maybe back to 7, and then maybe back to 6 as they converge. And in Welsh, Pleiad means a group, and Alcyon means superior holdfast of continuity. And this has been inherited into Greek mythology and reworked to fit their civilization, correct for them, but not the origin.
That's really interesting. Is there a numeric sign associated with the Pleiades in Welsh or no?
There is 6.
Interesting. Okay. So then, in
So
terms of a star chart, that would have been after it changed from 7 to 6.
7 is Sirius. So in the origin of numbers, I explain all the numbers, the origin, they're all celestial.
Interesting.
Do we have a sense of when it the Pleiades became only visible as 6? I guess I could look that up really quick.
I wouldn't I wouldn't know, and I wouldn't necessarily trust Stellarium.
Hmm.
How come?
But it takes 100,000 years. That's the most important thing, because over 100,000 years, a lot of the stars, the plough will lose its shape. It
Hmm.
didn't have its shape 100,000 years ago, and in 100,000 years, it won't look like plough. But so ancient ancestors were aware of the moving shapes, and they were also aware that the Pleiades held as a group. Normally, you'd expect that to spread apart, but it didn't. And they named it correctly.
Yeah, so the standard story is that they're just drifting apart from each other. So I don't know, maybe 100,000 years ago they would have been obviously separated, but it's very hard to put a date on when it would have gone from 7 to 6. But yeah, he was correct that all of these different traditions, the Greeks, indigenous Australians, Japanese, everybody has some standard myth about the lost Pleiade, like the disappearance of that.
That's crazy. So you said something interesting. You said that you wouldn't necessarily trust Stellarium. Why is that?
Well, I found that go back 1 precessionary cycle, it's not starts to lose its accuracy.
And how long ago is that?
How long ago did I find that out?
No, how long do you have to go back 1 processionary cycle?
Uh, 10 to 20,000 years.
Okay. That's interesting. So they basically it doesn't have the precession encoded inside of the software?
It has it up to 10,000 years ago, but they're using a sort of linear um, and not a sine wave repeating cycle.
I see. Okay, so your in Wales, you're starting to find these pieces on the landscape. You're starting to map them to the star constellations. Is the center point of the star map the top of Kara Idris? Where's the because in terms of the way that we see the constellations in the sky, the Earth is the center point. Where's the center point in this Welsh system?
At the moment, it's Polaris, and that is in Ursa Minor.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think when the star maps received their last iteration, the pole star was in Ursa Major. So I think yes, that was the center.
And what is the extent of the star maps? Like, what kind of territory are we covering? Is it one valley where everything is represented, or is this most of Wales that it takes? How big is this?
It's getting close to 2,000 square miles, which is like 1.5 million acres.
That's
All of North Wales.
okay. And so, who are the people that have the capacity to be able to make this relatively accurate map? So, okay, here's a question. How accurate are the distances and the placements of the constellations relative to one another and relative to the pole star that's placed at Kara Idris?
Yeah, very accurate. Yeah, I show in my books, a landscape view with all the constellations placed from their landscape connections, but also relative to each other, and they're all in the right place.
And do you have any insights into the people who would have done this? Like, who are these people?
Well, they're still the local people. They have a profound sort of memory of something important there. They've
Mm.
lost the direct representation to be able to explain it, but they're very aware of something happened here. I've been told directly that it's the language of heaven, for example. I've heard that a few times.
It's fascinating that this whole saga is taking place in this really interesting dark period of history, which
Yeah,
has become
absolutely.
even more obviously dark by the brightening of the discovery of the Göbekli Tepe
Yeah,
complex and Karahan Tepe to enlarge in that effect, because we see complex symbolic stoneworks and ceremonial structures that indicate, you know, that have celestial correspondence, that are indicating some sort of pretty well flushed out culture that's bringing in knowledge from different regions around that area. And then it's just dark until the Sumerians. Like, we
yeah,
don't have much of a
absolutely.
story to tell about what happens in this exact period where your star map is
Yeah,
perhaps being constructed.
we don't know. I do go into that in a in a in a small extent in the origin of time. So Göbekli Tepe, there's a line from Göbekli Tepe to Karahan Tepe. That is looking from Göbekli Tepe. It is sunrise on the winter solstice, and they are in direct line of sight. So you could make a signal, a light signal from one observatory to the other. And in the other direction, Sayberg, which is a new site of discovery, that's on the looking from Göbekli Tepe, that is the winter solstice sunset. And there is a direct line of sight except for one ridge. So Sayberg and Karahan Tepe are virtually on the same latitude, and they're almost in line of sight with one ridge in between the two of them across the Haran plain. And all of them got the same iconography, and as they uncover these sites. So it seems that it was a combined culture with a similar language, and they were trying to do something important with their sites.
And that region, who are we talking to about Karahan Tepe? Do you remember? Well, when I was talking to somebody who had been, we were both, we had someone on the podcast, so I can't remember their name. Was it Hugh? The other Hugh?
I think it was Hugh
Yeah,
Newman.
probably.
Yeah, it might have been the other Hugh. Um,
Because you,
but my impression was that it was an area that was rich with sites that had been barely explored. Like
oh
there's
yeah,
a
absolutely.
ton of information there,
Yeah,
and I would not be surprised if more and more celestial correspondences pop
yeah,
out of the woodwork.
No,
yeah.
it was Andrew. He had this like whole serpent cult
Oh,
idea.
I
Do you
Andrew
guess
know
so.
Collins.
Andrew
Andrew
Collins?
Collins, that's
Thank you.
right. That's who it was.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
Andrew.
I know you and Andrew very well, and I referred to their work in The Origin of Time. They discovered that the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are um, Professor Alexander Thom flattened circles, and they demonstrate an understanding of pi and phi, and they were built in the foot measurement system.
The foot measurement system?
The foot measurement system, yeah.
That's wild. How is that possible?
Um, well, the foot measurement system is on all continents in all these ancient sites, and foot is actually a Welsh word. So as a suffix, foot, F-E-double-D, if you apply it to any length, you create a measurement. That became feet and foot.
And so the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are their dimensions work out in feet rather than any other unit of
Yes.
measure?
Yeah.
It really radically changes the way that I am suspicious of the foot and mile system of measurement as having been a strange development over the course of human metrology.
Well, I've just come back from Easter Island, and I've got a complete data set of all the Moai measurements, the statues, and I've correlated them with every ancient measurement unit. And there is a high correlation with the foot measurement system, especially 6 feet. And on my heat map, there is a complete absence of the meter.
That's really interesting. The question of units is something that's been plaguing me a lot lately. Where we get these things? Do you know the conventional story of where we get the foot and these other units from, or is it just kind
Yes,
of?
I do. I do.
Can you tell it
The
to us?
foot, the foot there are 100 foot of the English root standard feet to 1 arc second of 1 arc minute of 1 degree latitude at the equator.
And
That's the foot.
when was the system invented?
So long ago, we don't know, because it's evolved at the same time as language evolved, because all of these proto measurement systems evolved with the same language modules. So foot, from the suffix foot, is made of 2 words, fe, which is what goes onward, and a suffix which creates a unit.
So, if the unit is inherently equatorial, then doesn't it seem to suggest that it comes from equatorial latitudes as opposed to being developed uniquely in a place like
Well, there are a
Wales?
number of other foot modules that are
Mm.
all interrelated by integers that allow measurements at different latitudes. And that's the work of John Neal, which I refer to quite a lot in my book, The Origin of Numbers. My book, The Origin of Numbers, which includes measurement, is about the etymological origin, proving that one civilization created all of our ancient measurement units.
And we've just been iterating on them ever since?
Yeah.
And what's the civilization that you think did that? It was
Well,
Middle
I
East
mean,
or
I think they were pretty under dryas, because that is the sort of period that the constellations would have had to have been looked at. I mean, it may have transitioned in a place that was more amenable to habitation during that difficult time. But I think ancient people were looking at stars for a very long period of time. Maybe everything's named in the last 20,000 years. We know there are constellations in southwest France at Lascaux that are carbon dated circa 20,000 years, which represent Orion and Taurus and the Pleiades. I don't know about anywhere else. There's a paucity of results dating some of these very ancient sites.
I mean, it makes sense that these ideas would be deeply inherited over time, right? Because the amount of effort that you need in order to figure out a system of measurement, in order to map it to the heavens, in order to name the heavens, it's a civilization level project in order to be able to have all of these things together. And then even if you perhaps run into neighbors and they don't have this and then you give it to them, over time it just becomes something that is just this background fact of existence where now that you have given the stars a frame, changing that frame and renaming constellations and rederiving a new system of measurements in order to put them into some kind of new unit seems like at most it would be a vanity project of some emperor that was trying to, slather his
I agree.
name.
And, the Greeks tried to do that. They tried to rename and represent some of the constellations. They didn't move them because they had been so long established. So we have Cepheus and Cassiopeia as the king and queen of some place called Ethiopia in Greek mythology, which is far enough away that we don't have to worry about where it is. And they have, they upset Poseidon by claiming that their daughter was more beautiful than Poseidon's daughters. And for this folly, the constellations have been turned sort of upside down. So, it's like putting a flag upside down. You're taking the mickey out of, or making fun of that flag. So these constellations have been turned around by the Greeks. And, we have the myth of Perseus saving Andromeda from the Kraken and all that sort of thing. And that's a rework, really, of the same myth in Welsh or British culture without the Kraken.
Plus, used in medieval culture, you just see this like Saint George and the Dragon, this saving the lady from, it's a very, very
Yeah,
conserved motif.
that's been knocked around so much, and over the first or the late first and early second millennium of the current era, a lot of these things have been politicized. Who was ever in control?
Hmm.
St. George killing the dragon, for example. Well, the dragon is an important character in British mythology, and it is also the power of the British kings. So it may well be um, trying to reflect turning the hero into the villain for a new presentation.
Victor's rewrite the history books, like it or not. In all of these rewrites and all of this turnover, do you feel like we have any sense of who these ancient Welsh people were? Because you say that in Wales there's this feeling that there was once something that was unbelievably important there. Pardon the interruption, but I have to ask you for a favor. If you are enjoying this program and you would like to support us and help us keep making excellent conversations about the greatest theories out there, then come over to patreon.com/DemystifySci. For just 75 cents a week, you can join our secret society that meets once a week, talk to us about all the ideas on the show, and help us figure out where to steer the ship to next. I'll see you there at patreon.com/DemystifySci.
Well, our ancient ancestors, and as sort of worldly, I won't use global. There's certainly northern circumpolar orientated people who inhabited the coastal regions and the estuaries, which have now been lost because the sea levels have risen. They suffered a great reduction in their number 70,000 years ago and subsequently at different times. And they may have had to emerge out of goodness knows where And I was thinking about it because I know your sort of like your overarching question is this who are these people? Who are these ancient ancestors? But my own matrilineal DNA, K1, emerged 70,000 years ago from the Caucasus. And maybe they're from there, but they are our ancestors. Who are these people? They're our ancestors. They gave us this amazing bequest, the heavens. And you were talking just before the break about, what did they think about the world and how did they see themselves? Well, when you get into time and look at the juxtaposition of the constellations on the three great rings of time, you start to understand how they saw themselves in time and space at all scales of time. So I say the origin of time is the working back all the 88 constellations, their true origin, but also time in all its forms and scales. So the Milky Way represents spiritual time. It provides a spiritual origin and what happens when you pass and go into the underworld. What happens when you die. Death is a Welsh word. It means to separate body from soul. And these meanings have been they've been withheld because the political environment 100 years ago was they wanted to destroy the Welsh language, the establishment at that time, because the Irish had just left the empire and they feared another secession by the Welsh. So they tried to destroy the language.
All right, so if I spend some time in Wales and I start working, I don't know, at a
Old guys at the pub.
yeah, I'm just hanging out with guys at the pub. Is there a sense of who their ancient ancestors are? Is there something you can pick up just by living in Wales
Yeah,
about this
absolutely.
ancient knowledge? Yeah.
Absolutely. So every town in Wales has got a Red Lion pub. So you'd be going to the Red Lion pub. Llw Coch, the Red Lion, is the rising sun. Llw is the lion, it's also the sun. Coch is red, and it's also the color of the rising of the sun. Gold is the setting sun, or the west. So that is still evades the population. All the tombstones have this type of iconography on them. Often a branch, which is a gwith. A gwith is also a goose, and is also spirit, and it's from the smaller word gwi, which is to glide. And depending on what context you use, you can and the sentence, you can understand what meaning is being used. That's why in ancient hieroglyphs we see a lot of geese, because how else do you convey this notion of spirit? It's an abstract thing. You need something that's not abstract to convey that meaning. So on the tombstones, there's lots of this spirit iconography. In my own ancestral home, the tombstones have anchors on, and it's quite close to the coast. But then a lot of places are close to the coast, and I've been in a lot of graveyards, and I've not seen this anywhere else. And this, my ancestors' home, a town called Llandri, is where the constellation, the great ship Argo Navis is. So this may be a recollection of the constellation in that area.
Is that a
So yes,
southern
there is.
Is that a southern hemisphere
It is.
constellation?
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Canopus is the bright star there. I had to go to the Canary Islands to see Canopus.
Is there a Is there evidence of the Welsh being seafaring?
Yes. So a boat is a hlong, and this is the origin of longitude, and it's from two smaller words, lle, which we've already had, which means a place, and on, which means continuity, a place of continuity, a longitude.
And so, have there been discoveries of ancient ships or any? Because there's no written evidence, but you have the iconography of an anchor, you have the constellation of the what was the ship?
Yeah, the great ship,
The
Argo
great ship.
Navis.
Okay, so you have the constellation of the great ship. You and information that can only be gained by going somewhere far away. And so is there direct evidence of them having ships that have been
Oh,
found off the coast of Wales or anything of the sort?
we have ships in Britain, but they're sort of dated to not that period. They're dated to the first millennium of the current era.
So there's a really interesting thread that runs through this. I know that Shiloh, when he wrote to you last, he mentioned Gavin Menzies' work.
Yeah,
Have you looked at it at all?
yeah. I've had a little look. Yeah.
What do you think?
Um, that's about the it's the myth of Atlantis.
It's really about the Minoans. I think he just named it that to get some clicks or
Right.
whatever.
Clickbait. Do
But
you want to tell
well,
people what it is?
yeah, I mean, I think that the salient point here is that if we think about the Bronze Age, the high point of the Bronze Age, to make bronze, wait, let me preface that. Bronze was a revolutionary technology because prior to the invention of bronze, you had metal, you had copper, but it's not very strong. You can't do a lot with it. It's brittle, it's ductile. But once you figure out that if you mix in a certain percentage of tin with your copper, you can forge
Yeah.
something that's really, really strong. And I think it, you know, quite evidently remodeled
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
face of
Fair enough.
civilization. Well, a lot of that tin came from Wales, from what I understand, or at least from the
Cornwall.
southern,
Yeah.
yeah, from Cornwall, right? And so there had to have, at least, to answer your question, Nastia, about were these people traveling on the seas, it's hard to imagine that there wasn't at least a lot of maritime trade.
Yeah. I
And
agree.
this is something that,
We
Gavin,
just don't have evidence for it. So, you said, is there evidence for boats? And I don't think so. The Nebra Sky disk, which was found in Germany, has got gold and tin in the bronze components that come from Wales and Cornwall. Cornwall is a source of very pure tin. It's actually uh, native pure tin in seeds, whereas elsewhere it's often in some complex compounds and needs to be reduced out of those compounds. So it's really hard to do that. So yeah, it would have been a prime source of tin in the ancient world, or to be used in bronze.
and Gavin writes about some of these mine structures in Wales, these complexes that are just incredibly developed, these just obviously industrial scale operations, stretching just miles of tunnels underground. I don't remember the details of that particular site, but it seems you're right. There's not some indirect evidence like a smoking gun of this ship or whatever, but by deduction, I mean, I don't think they were just carrying a bunch of metal on their backs between, let's say, Crete and Cornwall, right? I mean, the
No,
obvious
they'd
way to
actually
get
used
between the two.
most likely.
And so I think what Gavin's thesis boils down to is that the myth of Atlantis points to a maritime civilization that was controlling conservatively was at its peak during the height of the Bronze Age and facilitating that technological distribution to the rest of the known world,
Yeah,
all the way out to India, essentially, and certainly involved the collaboration with peoples as he speculates as far-reaching as the Great Lakes, which fits neatly into a lot of the other pieces we've unraveled here, but certainly into the Brittonic coast up to the Orkney Islands.
Yeah,
And the genetic evidence bears out a similar hypothesis too, with this haplogroup X that I was speaking of earlier.
yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not a side of my work that I put a lot of um, time into to reconcile it with my star maps. I think um, before these sea levels rose, I think there was a lot of activity around the coasts that enabled trade to be carried out relatively easily. And maybe there were periods where we had the technology further back in the past, but there are no artifacts around anymore.
Yeah, speaking of the sea levels rising, it's hard to think of another place more impacted than perhaps those peoples in that Britain, say coast of France area, right? Because there was an entire, I think the standard archaeological estimate is a quarter of the population died in this flood as one of these one of these ice walls broke
Yeah,
at some point. The
yeah,
Doggerland's
yeah.
disaster.
I mean, Britain was actually connected to Europe, like you say, via Doggerland, and that's been lost. So we became an island.
And that seems to have happened. I mean, it was progressive, but I think because of these ice dams, that it was a singular event in some sense
Was it
that,
rapid?
yeah, very, very quick. Perhaps some of the real disastrous moments happened like that, one day.
Yeah.
And I guess the picture that I'm starting to assemble is that there must be cultural exchange between the Mediterranean and Wales. Because if there isn't, then it's very difficult to explain how the Minoans get their tin. There's also this larger question, like Shiloh was pointing to where the Minoans get their unbelievably pure copper. Because the old copper culture of northern Michigan is one of the only places in the world that has been found to
Yeah.
have such pure copper.
Yeah.
And so then it suddenly starts to make sense where if the people that are in Wales recognize the value of the stuff that they're digging out of the earth, and they actually manage to maintain some kind of equal footing in terms of trade, then
Yeah.
the stars and the navigation and the
Yeah.
seafaring becomes
Absolutely.
it becomes the centerpiece of their civilization. It becomes literally
Yeah.
the lifeblood of their success and their wealth. And then it
Especially
motivates.
the
Hmm? Go ahead.
especially the northern constellations. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, especially the northern constellations. And so it creates this, if the two pieces are connected, then suddenly it creates this motivation for building the star map because it seems like that would be the the great pyramid, so to speak, of
Yeah.
Wales to be able to honor this massive
Yeah.
boon that has illuminated their culture.
Absolutely. I saw a documentary recently on the copper mining around the Great Lakes. We don't know what happens to all that copper.
Yes.
That's the other strange piece of the story. It's where did it
There's a
go?
lot
And
of
then
it.
the one really nice Minoan wreck we do have has this pure copper, and it's not possible to have this uncontaminated copper unless it's mined in that fashion. Certainly at that point in time.
Mm.
And so yeah,
Bang
these
with
are
the
all
pin.
indirect pieces. I mean, there's no smoking gun, but you're starting to see enough of these little pieces fit together that a very different picture emerges from this
I
kind of
quite agree.
this really
I
interesting
quite agree.
dark age, right?
Um, you know,
Historically dark, sorry, for us in terms
yeah,
of
I think
direct
the
record.
like academia, they just want to keep going backwards slowly, one layer at a time, being sure about what they uh, they're going back from. But it means that there's not this discussion about a great period before that, and we can start seeing these pieces emerging, and we need to have a discussion about it.
And I think that this is what's so great about the modern age, because it would have been much harder to find each other 100 years ago. We would have been, each of us in our little lane, kind of carving away at the pieces, but not being able to maybe combine them into a full story.
Yeah, I think they were quite pioneering 100 years ago. We sort of like had a stodgy bit in the middle where, or more recently, where there's not been a lot of progress made. Maybe we would have coalesced around one of the great learning centres and shared our opinions.
And that's possible too. I mean, archaeology in general is a really interesting piece of the puzzle because I feel like it's a discipline that begets perhaps the least amount of certainty just from the outside looking in. We have these tiny shards of history, these
Yeah,
disconnected pieces that offer us no continuous image of the ancient world. And yet, the stories that are written in the textbooks are written with immense certainty about that information. And I've never totally understood where that certainty comes from because it seems like if you have, 0.1% of the data points that you need in order to be able to get the full picture, that it would encourage you to be somewhat humble in terms of the stated certainty.
I think they were more broad-minded 100 years ago, and they had lots of different hypotheses about the ether and the expanding Earth and things like that. Um, what can I say? I hope it changes, and it's only through platforms like yours that we're getting change and we're able to share views. So thank you very much.
It's perplexing to me that it's changed to such a degree. And you've hinted a little bit at there being political motivations. And
Yeah,
in some ways, it seems like the objection is to the idea that there was some kind of super advanced culture that went around and spread its ideas through the world. And partially, I think that people want to be able to maintain the primacy of the indigenous cultures to say that they developed these things on their own and that these were not imported ideas by some, you know, far more advanced civilization that comes through and builds the star map or shows them the technology, shows them how to smelt bronze or do all of these things. It seems like this top-down desire to preserve the agency and fidelity of the indigenous cultures.
it's understandable, but you've also got to um, put into context the fact that a lot of these ancient sites on the inhabited continents are built with the same measurement module.
Well, that's a pretty unusual finding, right? That's a recent finding from the, I would say, the heterodox archaeologists.
Yeah, perhaps, but I mean, it can be checked.
What
I
did you go
mean,
to Easter Island for?
what did I go there for?
Yeah.
To measure things.
Did you know
I
what
was
you were
looking
planning to measure?
to Peru. Um,
Did you know what you were looking to measure, or you were just kind of like, I'll measure things and I'll figure it out later?
yeah, I mean, uh, I didn't get a lot of measuring done in Easter Island, to be honest. It was we went to see all the ancient sites, but I did measure a lot of the ancient sites in Peru and found the foot module.
And so Easter Island, is this part of a story that you're developing, or it was just an interesting destination because it is so unusual?
It is part of my research going forward. Yes,
And so you're expanding into the Pacific realm?
I'm expanding into trying to understand that period of this pre-Younger Dryas civilization, perhaps, what was going on the Earth at that time.
Have you ever read any Thor Heyerdahl?
No, but I've been to his museum on the Canary Islands.
I didn't realize there was one there.
Yeah, and climbed up his pyramid, you know, there on the Canary Islands, or the natives, not his museum is right next to the main pyramid on Tenerife, which is the Guanche tribe, Guanches, and there are a lot of ancient sites there that are aligned to the sun and the moon and things like that.
And so, okay, that's kind of an interesting connection to the southern constellations that you say are represented in Wales, because you'd have to go to the Canary Islands in order to be able to see those.
I had to go to the Canary Islands to see Canopus because it's not very visible from Britain. I mean, if you go around the precessionary cycle, the heavens become more visible. So it may well have been visible um, in Wales 10, 12,000 years ago. But
Mm.
the constellation Centaurus is not possibly visible in its entirety from North Wales ever. So if you want to see it, you have to go to at least the equator to see it. I mean, I did go to Peru in November as well. And what you have there, because it's at 15 degrees south, you've got the north and the south celestial poles on either side at night. You've got virtually the ecliptic going over the top, which is a really bizarre experience. And because of the hills and now some light pollution, you can't really see the poles.
But so, in terms of the constellations in Wales, are you thinking that they must have also gone to the Canary Islands, or do you think that they went elsewhere to
Well,
see
they
them?
could have gone over the land to the southern tip of Africa, perhaps, but that sounds quite hard work. So maybe they navigated around the coast.
Hmm.
How long have people been on
Uh,
the Canary Islands? Do you know?
no,
I want to say it's like 5,000 years or something. It's not that
yeah,
long.
Okay, well,
I mean,
so this is what's really interesting. This is why I mentioned Thor Heyerdahl, because I read Fatu Hiva recently. And so Fatu Hiva is this great book where he is young and idealistic. He's just, I think, finished undergraduate. He recruits this woman that he later marries, and they together they look at a map of all of the islands in Fiji and find one that they feel like has the least modern presence on it, and decide that they're going to abandon civilization and they're going to move to this island and just see what happens. And I think they spend maybe a year and a half there. It ends up being a real caper because the it is fairly uncontacted. The tribe at first welcomes them, then all of these tensions arise between them and the native tribes, and so they start to feel like all of the sudden they're very much not welcome there. And so they have to leave eventually. But in the time that they spend there, they make enough friends among the tribes people where they're taking them to these ancient sites. And a lot
yeah,
of the ancient sites are at the top of these pinnacles. And when
yeah,
they climb them, there's these arrangements of bones and carvings, and the inhabitants of Fatu Hiva tell him that the mythology of their island is that these sites were already there when they arrived. They were built
yeah.
by the people that lived there before
Yeah.
them. But the main
Same as East Island.
exactly, exactly. But the story that we have for the peopling of the Pacific is unbelievably recent. Like, I think that people weren't
Yes.
supposed to have arrived to Hawaii until the year I conservatively I say the year 500, but I think even later
Yeah,
than that.
about that. Same for East Island, I think,
And so
and New Zealand.
and so to me it's interesting because there's this tension between the story that the people tell that are indigenous to these islands now, where they acknowledge that there was somebody there before them. But the conventional story is that no, 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 these people were the first ones and these sites belong to them, and that's just this kind of accident of history that they tell the story that someone else was there first.
Well, I think there were definitely people there before the most recent um, inhabitants. I don't want to upset anybody going down this route. Um, I don't know who those people were. I've heard stories that in New Zealand they were tall, they had red hair, um, but I don't know that for sure. That's sort of beyond the scope of work that I've been working on.
But it does. s- It does point to a really interesting idea that I acknowledge is very, very unpopular right now. That there may have been a group of people that actually had the capacity to travel around the world, and they were in all of these different places. There's
Well,
um,
I think that's the case. And they left the foot measurement module as evidence of them being there.
and so if they were red-haired, is this a Welsh characteristic?
It is.
That's really interesting. Heyerdahl has this piece where he connects. He's a botanist by training, and so he's up in the hills of Fatu Hiva, and he's looking around, and he has this crazy moment where he realizes that all of the plants that are around him are also plants that are found on the South American mainland in the exact same form. And then he does this very I'd say underdeveloped mythological analysis where I think that it is the god Viracocha who is said to have left the coast of South America and then sailed to the east. And it is to him immediately conceivable that these two stories are somehow connected. But I think that he was pilloried for the rest of his life for supposing that that was even possible.
Yeah.
As many others have been. I feel like
Yeah.
the like Graham Hancock is a really interesting example of this, where I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
like he hit on some nerve in the world
Yeah.
where it's created conditions where it's almost impossible for people within the academy to even consider the ideas because there's this cloud around them that
Yeah.
prevents people from going near them. Do you experience this with your work as well?
No, I don't experience this with my work because nobody replies to me.
That might be the experience though. So
Yeah,
you
so I've not had the sort of hostility that Graham Hancock has had. I only really finished the second edition of The Origin of Numbers last summer, and then I did some traveling, and now I'm promoting my work. So I'm expecting to get pushback from some areas, but I don't mind having a discussion. I think this ancient advanced civilization polarizes people very, very much. And one of the problems is if people admit that there is this civilization, then the next question immediately is what happened to them? And that is more perplexing. And there are lots of people who don't want to get anywhere near that question.
it's interesting because I feel like the answer is they're still in the room with us. I've been slowly incubating this feeling that is not yet well evidenced that civilization is a technology that emerges and then spreads. It's a memetic concept. And so you can switch out the individual people because, climate changes, it stops raining, you destroy all of your trees while you're trying to smelt your tin and copper into bronze. You slowly collapse yourself. But the ideas never really die. And so what we live in is we live in the reverberations of whatever happened at Göbekli Tepe and before,
Absolutely.
because the idea
Absolutely.
has been transmitted.
And in The Origin of Time, we will look at the constellations on the three great rings of time. And it's a representation of how that ancient ancestor or ancient advanced civilization saw their time in all its scales and themselves within that temporal framework. It's very sophisticated and, certainly far more sophisticated than we've been led to believe about ancestors even 5000 BCE who could only just hunt and gather, and that's it.
Well, that seems to be obviously an incomplete story.
It is now, but recently it wasn't. That was just the established narrative. It's only Göbekli Tepe that it's pushed it back to just 10,000 BCE.
And that's the problem with the incredibly spotty archaeological record. I mean, in our continent, the whole dating structure was pushed back by many thousands of years by a single
Right.
set of footprints, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
crazy. The craziest thing about that discovery for me is that over the course of 10,000 years, I think it's between 20,000 and 10,000 BC, there's only one piece of evidence. And that
Yeah.
it's not like those people just showed up for a minute and left. Like, people must have been wandering around for 10,000 years and left no trace that we've stumbled
Yeah.
upon yet. I mean, that
Are
just
they
speaks to,
the footprints at White Sands?
yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
But my goodness, I mean, the next piece of evidence is like 10,000 years later after that. That's what's so wild, is just how much time erases of what must have been happening.
Yeah. Yeah. But the constellations are eternal. So they evolved over time and they cannot be erased. And subsequent cultures have adopted the constellations and may have repurposed some of the characters. So, Perseus and Hercules are relatively newcomers. They were renaming of constellations, but they have still endured those constellations. All the artifacts that those people who made those footprints in White Sands may have used, they've all been lost. Who knows whether they have the ability to use different tools and different materials over time? We don't know. It's all been lost. Iron, bronze, copper, all disintegrate over that period of time.
So you call it the Great Sirius Observatory.
Yeah.
Why? What's the importance of Sirius?
Sirius is an incredibly important star. And in the origin of time, I go into it in some detail. So I am proposing that Sirius is our sun's binary partner.
Yeah, I noticed this actually. It was like the one little piece of this story that I had trouble with, actually. I wanted to understand why you think that a little bit more.
Because the constellations are named to reflect its rotation in the heavens observed from Earth.
So, people have. So Walter Cruttenden has championed this idea. Did we have him on the show? I think we did a while back. We talked at length about this. So there's some issues with that idea from the astronomical data, which I wanted to see if you're aware of, because there's one little sentence in your book that I took issue with. It's a beautiful book. I love it. And there was just one sentence that I was like, which is that you say that the Gaia telescope was able to show that the series was in a binary relationship. And my understanding is that well, first of all, the Gaia satellite can't actually measure the motion of Sirius; it's too bright. But that every other land-based telescope has kind of shown quite the opposite, that there's no possible way it could be in a binary relationship with our sun, just because its proper motion is too great. It will zip past us whenever it comes in this direction. It has too much velocity. So I was kind of curious, like why you interpreted the Gaia data that way, and why, like how you reconcile this problem with the proper motion.
Okay. I will, between now and the next session, I'll recap on my notes on the Gaia telescope, but I'm not going to rely on that. I'm going to rely on the naming of the constellations. Now, at the moment, we can measure the proper motion of Sirius. And from memory, it's something like 1,300 milliarc seconds per year. And it's the fastest moving visible star in the heavens. And I know Walter Cruttenden, and I'm speaking at CPAC 14 in September. So I'm looking forward to that. And I know with his book that he is championing championing Barnard's star as our binary partner. I actually think that the sun has many partners at different scales. And the proper motion we measure at Sirius right now is not the speed it is moving at all points in its orbit, because we're in an elliptical orbit and it's furthest away from us. And we know it's furthest away from us because Ptolemy tells us that he referred to many of the most ancient astronomers to compile his charting of the heavens in the Almagest, and that Sirius changed color from red in recorded memory to now its present color, which is a sort of white blue. And it's only going to do that if it changes direction, and was going away from us and now redshifted and now is coming back towards us. And that will only happen at the furthest point, the apogee of its orbit with us. So it's going slowest right now. And if
Wait,
it is
slowest or fastest?
slowest right now, it's furthest away from us. It's like a comet, it's really far away, it's going really slow, and then it gets close to the sun and really goes quickly. Okay, for viewers. So all of these celestial bodies are in combined movement. So if we have this concept of Sirius going whizzing past us, well, from where to where? From above the ecliptic and to below the ecliptic and right off into far space somewhere. We're all going in rotations around each other.
Yeah, I think it could be a more complex system than we have modeled as it stands, but the proper motion really just tells us whether these two systems have enough, basically any orbital system is a balance between motion, forward motion, and gravitational attraction. And the distance that separates our sun from the Sirius system is too great to handle the motion that it has as observed in terms of its proper motion. And so it seems like the argument as it stands, and I would be totally down to go deep on this and try to make more sense of it, because it's something people have been arguing about for a while. As it stands, there seems no way to reconcile the gravitational strength, the distance and mass relationship with the motion of the star as it's seen from Earth. It's just moving too fast to conform to the potential for gravitational interactions between the two bodies. But that's as much as I understand about the argument as it stands.
Okay, well, I haven't seen that argument, but that might be the case. So the Sirius is represented in ancient mythology in several different cultures, which I detail in The Origin of Time, as an arrow or a hawk, and particularly a hawk on a post or stick. And this is what we see in the constellations Sagitta and Aquila, which is directly opposite in the heavens to where Sirius is now. So I'm suggesting that if Sirius is in a binary orbit, that it would be perigee, where those constellations are, because that's actually opposite where it is now.
It is super weird that the sun doesn't have a partner. Almost all of the stars that we thought didn't have partners are now appearing to have partners. Then the percentage of binary, at least binary, trinary, quaternary systems has completely blown up with the advent of modern astronomy. And it seems like almost everybody is in some sort of relationship with another star or multiple stars.
I agree.
So that'll be really...
If you just apply the gravitational model, then you might get a set of results out of that. So I left astrophysics because I didn't agree in just the gravitational model. So there are far greater forces that may keep celestial bodies in binary systems that are electromagnetic. Now, like if we're in a Bertrand current with these stars, we may be kept within that Bertrand current.
Yeah, I
So,
think there's a lot going on besides gravity as well. I don't have any expertise in that, but it seems like the gravitational models, at least as they stand, are failing miserably, which is how we end up with dark matter and all of this stuff at the bare
yeah,
minimum. And I think that the search for other gravitational or whatever, any kind of binding interactions between our sun and others is something that will produce more theories in the future. And I want to learn more about that. But I would be really careful about saying that the Gaia satellite has said
yeah,
anything
I'll
positive
check
about
on
the
that.
Sirius-Sun binary relationship. It is,
I'll check that.
yeah, be
I
careful with
can't
that
remember that.
because I would hate to, I would hate to have anybody try to discredit you on the basis of that statement. And
No, thank you for that.
I love your work so much that I
Thanks.
just I worry about these little pieces, you know.
Well, fine. Yeah, I mean that's lovely, and I'm not claiming I've got it all right, but I mean even I might think I've got a lot of it right, and uh, it needs to widen out discussion. And if it is right and it correlates with things like ancient structures and measurement systems and work that other people are doing, then it starts giving people a much better, deeper feeling about our ancient past.
And I think that that's one of the beautiful things about what you're doing, which is that you have a question. And the way that you assemble an answer to the question, it's impossible to imagine that it's going to be 100% correct. It doesn't work that way. Nobody's 100% right. Newton wasn't 100% right. Galileo wasn't 100%. Nobody's
No,
100% right. The project, as I see it, seems to be, and I see ourselves as participants in the same project. It is this attempt to find a question that is unanswered and then draw attention to it and then put forth the best possible story that
absolutely.
that manages to weave together more tendrils than have already been woven
I agree.
together. And that, I think, is the great part of your work, is that you have asked this really fundamental question, like why the star maps? Why time? Why these apparently universal, widely distributed measurement systems? This is
Yeah,
a strange
absolutely.
anomaly that
Yeah,
begs to be explained. And
yeah.
And just to say it's coincidence is always it's one of the least
It can't
satisfying
all
pieces
coincidence.
of studying these histories is whenever people I mean I understand they're trying to be conservative, but just to pretend like there's not something there is a bit silly.
Yeah.
yeah.
So did you want to preview what maybe another conversation would look like? Where would we go from here?
hmm
Because yeah, what might we hope to discover in these other two books?
Well, what our ancient ancestors believed about themselves as individuals, as a culture, and us, because they left us what they thought was the most valuable thing they could leave, their representation of their understanding of the everything in the heavens and their language. Whatever they had to endure, they wanted us to know about it so that we might not have to endure the same thing.
That's beautiful. And then connect these three rings: the ecliptic, the Milky Way, and the ring of creation. Tease us a
Connect
little
them.
bit. Well, bring them into the story so that we know where we're headed to next.
Okay. I'll just backtrack a step because when I started Zodiac, I wasn't trying to find this overarching answer to what what was emerging. I was just discovering things in the landscape. I've had to get to where I am because it was a natural path of um, understanding the problem, if you like, and as was the origin of time, which is the three great rings of time, the ecliptic, the ring of creation, and the Milky Way. So the ecliptic is the tick-tock movement of time. Um, represented by the sun, the moon, the planets against the 12 signs of the zodiac. And once you know that, you have a sense of the movement of time in the moment, but also that the past has existed and there is a future. And that's conceptually, we can then we can give this to our ancient ancestors as something they understood, because they then represent that in the other two rings. So the Milky Way, and the Milky Way, the stars of the Milky Way are all the souls of our ancestors. And this is the travel, I call it the great travelator of spirit. So it starts at the South Pole, because as a Northern Hemisphere people, the South Celestial Pole was a place of mystery, a place of a repository. They could see the North Celestial heavens. They were navigating by it. It was more mundane. So the origin of spirits, and they understood that when we're born, we are made, and this spirit suddenly emerges. And this is the soul passing the ecliptic into the mortal plane. And the constellation that is placed just before the ecliptic on the transition along the Milky Way into the mortal plane is Corona Australis. And this is the coracle. And this is the myth of Sargon of Akkad coming on in a little coracle or basket on the river to become emperor of the Akkadian Empire. This is Moses in his little basket on the river of life. They're borrowing from this celestial pantheon that already existed. They're saying, we have the authority. You come into the immortal world, you rise to the top of the heavens, where in the ancient British mythology, there is Beli Mor and Don. They're the couple that create the universe. And they occupy the North Celestial Pole, the most important pole. And Beli Mor, Beli is like a bailey, which is an outside perimeter. Mor means great. A Bella is a wolf. That's why at the top of the Babylonian star map and the Egyptian star map is a wolf. And that is why Romulus and Remus were nurtured by a she-wolf, because that is the conflation of Don, the female, and Beli Mor, represented by the wolf, the male, that created the universe. Don is the female goddess that nurtures the mortal world. And we have all these rivers called Don, Danube, Dnieper, and Dnester. This is the flow of life. And then we go down to the ecliptic again, we pass the ecliptic, and the great ship is the last great journey of the soul. And you've gone into the underworld, back to the repository of spirit. And the ring of creation is, so that tells us, the Milky Way tells us that our ancient ancestors, they created this symphony, this great orchestration. They understood the metaphysical aging of our civilization, the soul as an individual, as a collective. And the ring of creation is two parts. It's about survival of a cataclysm. So in the Northern Hemisphere, it starts with Bootes and Virgo, and they are the prime progenitor couple. They harness the plough that's attached to the bull that ploughs the field, the great field, which is Pegasus. This is a metaphor of turning seed into a civilization. And in the Southern Hemisphere, we have the same concept of survival of a cataclysm on a boat, which is the great ship, along the river Eridanus, up past the whale, Cetus, again back to Aquarius and the great field. So they are the three rings, great rings of time, and all the constellations are set in the right order and named to reflect their rock.
That's really beautiful. I'm really looking forward to exploring that more. There's so much in there, including and certainly not limited to the disappearance of the pair from mythology.
That's
Like
a huge one.
at some point, as you're describing these constellations, there's the male and the female that together are producing the arc of the world as it moves. And then as you shift into the modern religious era, there's not the union anymore. There is the single solitary figure that sits on top. And so I feel like there's an important metaphysical rupture that happened somewhere along the lines where we departed from the culture of the star maps and the
Some of
unity.
it is represented. There's been about 4,000 years of war in Europe and over many different royal dynasties. And, the Battle of Troy is one of the classic sort of convergences of this. And there is a myth that there's been at least 2 battles of Troy, and one of them was in Britain.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why some of this history has been suppressed is because they don't want any more of this sort of disruption. But when the church came into power in Europe, they had no monarchistical, if that's the right word, authority. So they invented it. They said that the Roman emperors came from Romulus and Remus, which weren't connected to any other royalty in Europe, and that they were the inheritors of the Roman Caesars, the Roman emperors. And we had that for 1,000 years.
Mm. I mean, there's a lot left to unpack here. I feel like you said something at the very beginning about he who controls time controls everything. And the mythological, metaphysical stories that we tell ourselves are very much the grounds for the space in which our minds exist. And so as these celestial stories fade and instead are replaced by these, monarchic, political, state-sponsored stories, we see this massive shift in the way that society is organized. And if there is something in these star maps that can help us learn the lessons that were so hard won in the past, I think that it's definitely worth understanding, because it does seem like a tremendous amount of effort to go to just for the sake of some vanity project of laying out the constellations.
Oh, yeah, and it's been maintained ever since. Whenever the start date was, it has been maintained.
Mm,
The language remained intact there. I mean, it went through a dodgy phase in southern Wales where people's, have fallen out of use of the Welsh language, but it's remained robust in North Wales.
it's
They
very cool.
designed a whole society around it to preserve it.
It's beautiful. What do you think, Shiloh?
Yeah, I think it's a good place to put a pin in it. We will dig into the next 2 books and let's hang out again.
It was really
Lovely to
wonderful,
see
Hugh.
you both. Thank
Yeah,
you very much.
thank you,
Looking
Hugh.
Thank you
forward
so
to the
much.
next time.
All
Good
right,
work,
we'll see you
sir.
again soon.
Right, take care. Bye-bye.
All
Have a
right,
great
have a
day.
good night.
Bye.
See ya.